Mahmud Ghazan was the seventh ruler of the Mongol Empire's Ilkhanate division in modern-day Iran from 1295 to 1304. He was the son of Arghun and Kutlu Khatun, continuing a long line of rulers who were direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Considered the most prominent of the Ilkhans, he is best known for making a political conversion to Islam in 1295 when he took the throne, marking a turning point for the dominant religion of Mongols in West Asia. His principal wife was Kokochi, was a Mongol princess sent by his Khagan Kublai Khan, and escorted from the Mongol capital to the Ilkhanate by Marco Polo. Military conflicts during Ghazan's reign included war with the Egyptian Mamluks for control of Syria, and battles with the Turco-Mongol Chagatai Khanate. Ghazan also pursued diplomatic contacts with Europe, continuing his predecessors' unsuccessful attempts at forming a Franco-Mongol alliance. A man of high culture, Ghazan spoke multiple languages, had many hobbies, and reformed many elements of the Ilkhanate, especially in the matter of standardizing currency and fiscal policy. Childhood. At the time of Ghazan's birth, the leader of the Ilkhanate was Abaka Khan, his grandfather. Ghazan's father Arghun was viceroy in Khorasan for Abaka. Ghazan was the eldest son of Arghun and Kulu of the Dorban clan, though he was raised in the order of his grandfather Abaka's favorite wife, Balu Khan Khatun, who herself was childless. Ghazan was baptized and raised a Christian, as was his brother Uljachu. The Mongols were traditionally tolerant of multiple religions, and during Ghazan's youth, he was educated by a Chinese monk, who taught him Buddhism, as well as the Mongolian and Uyghur scripts. After Abaka's death in 1282, Ghazan's father Arghun was crowned as Ilkhan. The 11-year-old Ghazan became viceroy, and he moved to the capital of Khorasan with the others of Balan's Ordo. Viceroy. The young Ghazan participated in the traditional Mongol activities of hunting and riding. His companions were Kulu Shah of the Manghud, Nuranaga of the Jurkin, and Saduddin Savaji. In 1289, conflict with other Mongols ensued when a revolt was led against Arghun by Noruz, a young noble of the Oirat clan, whose father had been governor of Persia before the arrival of Hulagu. When Noruz was defeated, he fled the Ilkhanate and joined the alliance of Kaidu, another descendant of Genghis Khan who was the ruler of both the House of Ogedei and the neighboring Chagatai Khanate. Ghazan spent the next 10 years defending the frontier of the Ilkhanate against incursions by the Chagatai Mongols of Central Asia. When his father, Arghun, died in 1291, Ghazan was prevented from pursuing his claim of leadership in the capital because he was engaged both with Noruz's raids and dealing with rebellion and famine in Khorasan and Nishapur. Tahachar, an army commander who had served the previous 3 generations of Ilkhan, was probably behind the death of Arghun, and supported Ghazan's uncle Gaykatu as the new Ilkhan. Ghazan was loyal to his uncle, though he refused to follow Gaykatu's lead in introducing paper currency to his province, explaining that the weather of Khorasan was too humid to handle paper. In 1294–1295, Ghazan forced Noruz to surrender at Nishapur, and Noruz then became one of Ghazan's lieutenants. During Gaykatu's reign, Ghazan's principal wife during his lifetime became Kokchan, who had been brought from the Yuan dynasty from the east by Marco Polo. She had originally been betrothed to Ghazan's father, the Ilkhan Arghun, but since he had died during her months-long journey from the capital, she instead married Ghazan, his son. Reign. Conversion to Islam in 1295. Tahachar and his conspirators, who had been behind the death of Arghun, had his successor Gaykatu killed as well. They then placed the controllable Baidu, a cousin of Ghazan, on the throne. Baidu was primarily a figurehead, allowing the conspirators to divide the Ilkhanate among themselves. Within a few months, Ghazan challenged Baidu for the throne, having him executed on October 5, 1295. Ghazan was assisted in this by his earlier enemy, the prominent Muslim Mongol emir Noruz. Ghazan converted to Islam on June 16, 1295, at the hands of Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn al-Mu'ayyid ibn Hamway al-Khurasani al-Jawini as a condition for Nowruz's military support. Another who assisted Ghazan was Taha Shah, but Ghazan deemed him unreliable, exiled him to Anatolia, and later had him discreetly murdered. As part of his conversion to Islam, Ghazan changed his first name to the Arab Mahmud, and Islam gained popularity within Mongol territories. Privately, Ghazan still practiced Mongol shamanism and worshipped Tengra, honoring his ancestors' worship of heaven as a kind of proto-Islamic monotheism. He showed tolerance for multiple religions, encouraged the original archaic Mongol culture to flourish, tolerated the Shiites, and respected the religions of his Georgian and Armenian client kings. Ghazan therefore continued his forefathers' approach toward religious tolerance. When Ghazan learned that some Buddhist monks feigned conversion to Islam due to their temples being earlier destroyed, he granted permission to all who wish to return to Tibet, where they can freely follow their faith and be among other Buddhists. The Mongol Yasa code remained in place, and Mongol shamans remained politically influential throughout the reign of both Ghazan and his brother and successor Uljichu. But ancient Mongol traditions eventually went into decline after Uljichu's demise. Other religious upheaval in the Ilkhanate during Ghazan's reign was instigated by Nowruz, who issued a formal edict in opposition to other religions in the Ilkhanate. Nowruz loyalists persecuted Buddhists and Christians to such an extent that Iranian Buddhism never recovered. The Christian cathedral in the Mongol capital of Maraha was looted, and churches in Tabriz and Hamadan were destroyed. Ghazan put a stop to these exactions by issuing an edict exempting the Christians from the jizya, and re-established the Christian Patriarch Ma'yaballah III in 1296. In May 1297, Ghazan arrested the Nowruz partisans for treason, and then later that year marched against Nowruz himself, who at the time was the commander of the army of Khorasan. Ghazan's forces were victorious at a battle near Nishapur. Nowruz took refuge at the court of the Malik of Herat in northern Afghanistan, but the Malik betrayed him and delivered Nowruz to Ghazan, who had Nowruz executed immediately on August 13. Ghazan thereafter attempted to control the situation, and in 1298 nominated a Jewish convert to Islam, Rachid al-Din Hamadani, as prime minister, a post which Rachid held for the next 20 years, until 1318. Ghazan also commissioned Rachid al-Din to produce a history of the Mongols and their dynasty, the Jami al-Tawarikh Compendium of Chronicles, or Universal History. Over several years of expansion, the work grew to cover the entire history of the world since the time of Adam, and was completed during the reign of Ghazan's successor, Uljichu. Many copies were made, a few of which survive to the modern day. Relationship with other Mongol Khanates. Ghazan eased the troubles with the Golden Horde, but the Oghadids and Chaghatides in Central Asia continued to pose a serious threat to both the Ilkhanate and his overlord and ally the Great Khan in China. When Ghazan was crowned, the Chaghatid Khan Duwar invaded Khorasan in 1295. Ghazan sent two of his relatives against the army of Chagatai Khanate, but they deserted. When the traitors were captured and executed, some other notable Mongol nobles began to leave his side. Balchu of the Jalayir and Sulemish of the Oirat revolted against the Ilkhan's rule in Turkey in 1296 and 1299. Sulemish welcomed the Egyptian Mamluks to Anatolia, which postponed Ghazan's plan to invade Syria, though two Mongol rebels were defeated by Ghazan. A large group of the Oirats fled Syria, defeating the contingent sent by Ghazan in 1296. Along with those rebellions, invasions of the Neguderis of the Chagatai Khanate caused difficulties to Ghazan's military operations in Syria. Ghazan maintained strong ties with the Great Khan of the Yuan and the Golden Horde. In 1296 Timur Khan, the successor of the Kublai Khan, dispatched a military commander Baju to Mongol Persia. 5 years later Ghazan sent his Mongolian and Persian retainers to collect income from Hulagu's holdings in China. While there, they presented tribute to Timur and were involved in cultural exchanges across Mongol Eurasia. Ghazan also called upon other Mongol Khans to unite their will under the Timur Khan, in which he was supported by Kaidu's enemy Bayan Khan of the White Horde. Ghazan's court had Chinese physicians present. Mamluk Ilkhanate War. Ghazan was one of a long line of Mongol leaders who engaged in diplomatic communications with the Europeans and Crusaders in attempts to form a Franco-Mongol alliance against their common enemy, primarily the Egyptian Mamluks. He already had the use of forces from Christian vassal countries such as Cilicia and Armenia and Georgia. The plan was to coordinate actions between Ghazan's forces, the Christian military orders, and the aristocracy of Cyprus to defeat the Egyptians, after which Jerusalem would be returned to the Europeans. Many Europeans are known to have worked for Ghazan, such as Isel the Pisan or Buscarello de Gaisolfi, often in high positions. Hundreds such Western adventurers entered into the service of Mongol rulers. According to historian Peter Jackson, the 14th century saw such a vogue of Mongol things in the West that many newborn children in Italy were named after Mongol rulers, including Ghazan. Names such as Kangrandi, Alawan, Argon or Cassano were recorded with a high frequency. In October 1299, Ghazan marched with his forces towards Syria and invited the Christians to join him. His army took the city of Aleppo, and was there joined by his vassal King Hethum II of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia, whose forces included some Templars and Hospitallers, and who participated in the rest of the offensive. The Mongols and their allies defeated the Mamluks in the Battle of Wadi al-Khazanda, on December 23 or 24, 1299. One group of Mongols then split off from Ghazan's army and pursued the retreating Mamluk troops as far as Gaza, pushing him back to Egypt. The bulk of Ghazan's forces proceeded to Damascus, which surrendered somewhere between December 30, 1299, and January 6, 1300. Though its citadel resisted, most of Ghazan's forces then retreated in February, probably because their horses needed fodder. He promised to return in the winter of 1300 to 1301 to attack Egypt. About 10,000 horsemen under the Mongol general Malay were left to briefly rule Syria, before they too retreated. He was indeed feared and despised by the Mamluk, who sent a delegation of leading scholars and imams including Ibn Taymiyyah, to Marageh, in order to persuade Ghazan Khan, the Khan of the Mongol Ilkhans of Iran, to stop his attack on the Muslims. Though it is reported that not one of the scholars dared to say anything to Ghazan except Ibn Taymiyyah, who said, "You claim that you are Muslim and you have with you muaddins, muftis, imams and sheikhs, but you invaded us and reached our country for what? Although your father and your grandfather, Hulagu, were non-believers, they did not attack us and they kept their promise. But you promised and broke your promise." In July 1300, the Crusaders formed a small fleet of 16 galleys with some smaller vessels to raid the coast, and Ghazan's ambassador traveled with them. The Crusader forces also attempted to establish a base at the small island of Ruid, from which raids were launched on Tartus while awaiting Ghazan's forces. However, the Mongol army was delayed, and the Crusader forces retreated to Cyprus, leaving a garrison on Ruid which was besieged and captured by Mamluks by 1303. In February 1301, the Mongols advanced again with a force of 60,000, but could do little else than engage in some raids around Syria. Ghazan's general Kutlushah stationed 20,000 horsemen in the Jordan Valley to protect Damascus, where a Mongol governor was stationed. But again, they were soon forced to withdraw. Plans for combined operations with the Crusaders were again made for the following winter offensive, and in late 1301, Ghazan asked Pope Boniface VIII to send troops, priests, and peasants, in order to make the Holy Land a Frank state again. But again, Ghazan did not appear with his own troops. He wrote again to the Pope in 1302, and his ambassadors also visited the court of Charles II of Anjou, who on April 27, 1303 sent Gualterius de Lavandel as his own ambassador back to Ghazan's court. In 1303, Ghazan sent another letter to Edward I via Buscarello de Ghisolfi, reiterating his great-grandfather Hulagu Khan's promise that the Mongols would give Jerusalem to the Franks in exchange for help against the Mamluks. The Mongols, along with their Armenian vassals, had mustered a force of about 80,000 to repel the raiders of the Chagatai Khanate, which was under the leadership of Qilu Khwaja. After their success there, they advanced again towards Syria. However, Ghazan's forces were utterly defeated by the Mamluks just south of Damascus at the decisive Battle of Marj al-Safar in April 1303. It was to be the last major Mongol invasion of Syria. Reform Ghazan was a man of high culture, with many hobbies including linguistics, agro-techniques, painting, and chemistry. According to the Byzantine historian Pachemias, no one surpassed him in making saddles, bridles, spurs, greaves and helmets. He could hammer, stitch and polish, and in such occupations employed the hours of his leisure from war. Ghazan spoke numerous languages, including Chinese, Arabic, and Frank, as well as his own native language Mongolian. In addition to his religious deep impact on Persia, Ghazan unified measures, coinage and weights in the Ilkhanate. He ordered a new census in Persia to define the dynasty's fiscal policy. He began to reuse wilderness or abandoned lands to raise crops, strongly supporting the introduction of Eastern Asian crops in Persia, and improved the yam. He constructed hostels, hospitals, schools, and posts. Envoys from the court received a per diem stipend, and those of the nobility traveled at their own expense. Ghazan ordered only envoys bearing urgent military intelligence to use the staffed postal relay service. Mongol soldiers were given IQTAs by the Ilkhanate court, where they were allowed to gather revenue provided by a piece of land. Ghazan reformed the issuance of jarliks, creating set forms and graded seals, ordering that all jarliks be kept on file at court. Jarliks older than 30 years were to be cancelled, along with old prizes. He fashioned new prizes into 2 ranks, which contained the names of the bearers on them to prevent them from being transferred. Old prizes were also to be turned in at the end of the official's term. In fiscal policy, Ghazan introduced a unified bimetallic currency including Ghazani dinars, and reformed purchasing procedures, replacing the traditional Mongol policy on craftsmen in the Ilkhanate, such as organizing purchases of raw materials and payment to artisans. He also opted to purchase most weapons on the open market. On coins, Ghazan omitted the name of the Great Khan, instead inscribing his own name upon his coins in Iran and Anatolia. In Georgia, he minted coins with the traditional Mongolian formula, struck by the Ilkhan Ghazan in the name of Kargan, because he wanted to secure his claim on Caucasus with the help of the Great Khans of the Yuan dynasty. He also continued to use the Great Khan's Chinese seal, which declared him to be a wang below the Great Khan. His reforms also extended to the military, as several new guard units, mostly Mongols, were created by Ghazan for his army center. However, he restricted new guard's political significance, seeing Mongol commoners selling their children into slavery as damaging to both the manpower and the prestige of the Mongol army. Ghazan budgeted funds to redeem Mongol slave boys, and made his minister Bolard commander of a military unit of redeemed Mongol slaves. Ghazan died on May 10, 1304. In his final illness, as he had no surviving son, he nominated his brother Uljachu as his successor.